Your book attempts to trace the idea of the promised land from biblical times through medieval European Christianity, early capitalism, right through to present-day corporate globalization. It's a very ambitious task. Can you tell us how you came to write the book?
Yes, I got the inspiration for it as a participant in the anti-globalization movement, working with people roughly half my age. And I remember several meetings in the mobilization for global justice. We were planning the Quebec City demonstrations. And it just struck me that there was no resonance in the discussions of any kind of what we could call transcendental guarantees. No one was talking about God on our side, history on our side, the advance of industry or technology, or much less, of course, the market being some kind of panacea. And this struck me as something new. I'd been involved in political activity and political movements for 30 years, and all of them had been, if not suffused, at least influenced by these kinds of notions. So it struck me that the anti-globalization movement was different, was something new, and I came to believe eventually that it was essentially the living negation of the core mythology of our culture. And I wrote the book to really hold a mirror up to the movement so that it could see its significance in a much broader, from a much broader perspective. I mean, as you probably know, and your listeners certainly know, there have been many efforts to try to understand this movement and try to sort of pin down its vision, etc. And all of this has been, to my mind, much too short-sighted, that is, looking for some kind of immediate meaning, when actually the meaning is much larger and much more grand. So that's what prompted me to write the book, and
well,
I wrote it for the movement, and the book is written in the style and the form without any academic apparatus, and it's in a form, paperback, small book, so that activists can read it.
Well, let's get into the argument that you make. We could just start with this idea of the promised land, which
right.
And maybe you can start by just telling us, what does that mean in the Bible itself?
Well, before we look at it in the Bible, let's just look at it, in a very common sense understanding. I mean, if we look at the idea and the structure of a promise, okay? Kristen, I promise you fame and fortune, let's say. Okay, that's me giving you a promise, okay? Immediately, it shifts our focus of attention from the today, from the moment, from the here and now, from the present, to some future fulfillment of the promise. That's one of the implications of a promise. Secondly, it shifts the source of your destiny, that is, from you shaping your own life, to some kind of faith that I will, as the keeper of the promise. That is, you are not going to achieve fame and fortune by your own designs, but it will come to you as a result of the fulfillment of the promise that I made to you. Okay, so the implications of a promise is, first of all, a kind of deferment of life, a shift from experience to expectation, so to speak, from now to the future. Okay, and secondly, it entails a kind of alienation from your own agency, and instead a kind of determinism, some kind of guarantor of the fulfillment of the promise. Now, this is all the more pronounced when the promise is made not by me, a human being, but allegedly by some supposed supernatural being. Okay, so the estrangement from our own shaping of our own destiny and the determinism, the power of some kind of other agency in our life is magnified exponentially. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a promise that was made. Again, this is mythology. These are fairy tales we're talking about here, just so everyone understands it. The story is that there was a person named Abraham who never existed, who one day hears voices, and the voices are from some supernatural, disembodied, invisible entity. And these voices make a promise, actually a series of promises. This is from Genesis in the Bible. Chapter 12 is when it begins. A promise of future greatness, a promise of future greatness to the heirs of Abraham, a promise of some vaguely defined piece of real estate. And the quid pro quo, what Abraham has to do is heed this voice, obey the commands of this voice, and then the promise will be fulfilled. That's the story. And this promise, which begins in the Old Testament, is then carried forward into the New Testament with the second fairy tale about a person named Jesus Christ, who also never existed, in which the Messiah, some person who has a strange relationship, a very almost an identical relationship with this supernatural entity, comes to life and then is killed and then is resurrected. And this is the embodiment, that resurrection, of the promise of the fulfillment that was offered to Abraham, that is, the fulfillment being the restoration of perfection. I mean, the foundation of this whole story is the story of Adam and Eve and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden and the loss of perfection and divine likeness. And what God is promising to Abraham from chapter 12 on is a restoration of that perfection. In fact, it's explicit. Go thou before me and be perfect. So Christ and the story of Christianity is a elaboration and, in a way, an intensification of this